No, she's up by the sound. No, she can sit here. Yeah. I was giving her an exit. All right, right over here. Okay. No, don't let me leave without my roll with that.
Thank you.
We'll say that at the end.
Good morning, everyone. Let me try that again. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for being here. My name is Dr. Geraldine Johnson, and I'm the director for the Department of Choice and Career Options here in the school district. I would like to welcome everyone to our James Otis lecture series in celebration of our Constitution Day. This program is a long-standing partnership between the Palm Beach chapter of the American Board of Trial Advocates, also known as ABOTA, and the Department of Choice and Career Options here in the school district. Ms. Marsha Marie Mosley and other members of my staff, along with Mr. Bill Price and his law firm, our school district legal and communications teams, have organized a fantastic educational program for you this morning to learn more about our Constitution and one of our most sacred constitutional rights, the right to vote. Thank you also to our esteemed panel of judges for your time and dedication and for allowing our students this opportunity to learn from you. Thank you, Dr. Debra Robinson, our school board vice chairwoman, for joining us this morning, and to our school chaperones and our pre-law and criminal justice academy students who are here with us today. I would be remiss if I didn't also say welcome to our guests in the audience from Shelby County Schools in Memphis, Tennessee. They have joined us this week and have gone on visits to our school and visited some of our academies throughout the week. We have been sharing best practices amongst each other, so I want to welcome our visitors from Shelby County School District. At this time, I'd like to ask everyone to please stand for the presentation of our nation's colors by the Santa Lucia's High School Criminal Justice Academy Honor Guard under the leadership of School District Police Officer Rosemary White and Corporal Natasha Mitchell with the Palm Beach Sheriff Office. Please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance led by Dr. Peter B. Licata, our Assistant Superintendent for the Division of Choice and Innovation. Color Guard.
Forward, march, left, 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 right, left, 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 right, left, left, mark time, march. Ready, pull, left, face, freeze and arms.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Order, arms. Right, face. Forward, march. Left, 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 right, left, 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 right, left, 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 left.
Please be seated.
Well, good morning, everyone. I want to say good morning to especially our students out there. On behalf of our superintendent, Dr. Donald Fenoy, I want to send this message. Yesterday, he was speaking, and he spoke of how we prepare our students for the workforce and for real life. How can we do that? How can we be better at it? This is one of those examples. Our teachers are phenomenal. They're wonderful. But until you can experience stuff outside the classroom in a real environment, with protocols, with professionals, with judges, we are able to now have a situation where you see what goes on. And please take this as an incredible learning experience. This is the real deal. We get to see it. We get to hear it from the people that make major decisions in our community. And I believe that you guys will be even better when you are taking care of us that are sitting up here. So thank you, kids, for being here. It is about you guys. And that's why we've all joined together today to help you see what goes on beyond the classroom. So thank you for being here.
Good morning. It is so exciting to be here with each of you this morning. I'm so excited, and it's just such a beautiful, beautiful event. And looking out at all your faces lets me know that this is certainly an appropriate day to be here and take part in this with each and every one of you. I am also very excited and honored to be able to introduce to you, or to some of you, and many of you probably already know this wonderful, wonderful woman, our esteemed board member and vice chairwoman of the school board, Dr. Debra L Robinson. Dr. Robinson was raised in Flint, Michigan, home of the community school concept. She graduated from Flint Central High School and Michigan State University with a Bachelor's of Science degree in biology with honors. She is a proud graduate of Howard University College of Medicine, class of 1981. Dr. Robinson completed her internship and residency training in internal medicine at Hurley Medical Center and McLaurin General Hospital in Flint, Michigan. Her medical practice has ranged from emergency medicine in Belle Glade and Okeechobee to HMO medicine to a private practice. She recently, and I know she's very excited about this, retired from caring for our veteran population at the West Palm Beach Veterans Affairs Medical Center, and now can dedicate all of her time, her full time, to working for the students of Palm Beach County. As a school board member, Dr. Robinson leads the charge for a focus on addressing the socio-emotional needs of students and staff, a single-gender school at the historic Roosevelt High School, fairness in the application of disciplinary rules, and the use of disaggregated data to drive district movement to equity. Additionally, Dr. Robinson is a past president of the Palm Beach County Caucus of Black Elected Officials and a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Dr. Robinson believes that respect for the community is necessary in order to assist the community. She continues to work for systemic change while focusing on the needs of individual students.
I guess that's my cue. Good morning. So I am Dr. Debra Robinson, Vice Chair of the Palm Beach County School Board. And on behalf of the school board, the superintendent, and the staff of Palm Beach County Schools, I welcome you, all of you, especially the young people, to this 8th Annual Constitution Day. So just so that I'm clear, let's see who's in the room. So we had the pre-law academies from what? L.C. Swain. You in the house? Okay. Then we have Yeager Middle. Okay. Spanish River. Okay. Palm Beach Lakes High. Where are you? Yay! Okay. Sorry, I have special love for Palm Beach Lakes. Okay. The Criminal Justice Academies from Lake Worth High. Oh, okay, y'all just gonna show out. Okay. Glade Central. Okay. Atlantic High. Oh, all right. They set a new standard. They're standing up. Okay. Jupiter High. Okay. Santa Lucis. And Forest Hill. Yay. I am so proud of you. Each of you, I know each of you have worked hard to get into the programs that you're in, and there's more hard work to come, and I expect that you will rise to the challenge. I want to thank each of you in advance for your service and your commitment to justice. Now, let me just say this. Now, the people who asked me to speak knew what they were in for. Maybe you don't know, but let me just tell you. So, speaking of justice, some people think that justice means just us. There are lots of disparities in our systems, education and criminal justice, right? And I want to remind you, as you study the Constitution, that my ancestors were not included in the protections guaranteed by the Constitution when it was originally written. So I ask that you make sure that justice is not just us. I ask that you will read, unlike ever before, that you will commit yourself to the study of justice. And I ask that you work for freedom and justice for all, not just some. And so I'm going to close my comments with one of my favorite quotes, and it's by Malcolm X. I would ask you to read Malcolm X and not just believe what you heard. But his quote is, you need to make sure that you look for yourself, hear for yourself, and think for yourself, or you will find yourself loving your enemies and hating your friends. And so on that note, on behalf of the school board, the superintendent, and staff, I welcome you to this wonderful occasion, and thank you for allowing me to be here.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
That's better. My name's Bill Price, and I'm here on behalf of ABOTA, A-B-O-T-A. That stands for American Board of Trial Advocates. Who are the members of ABOTA? The members are 7,000 of the best and brightest attorneys across America, plaintiff and defense attorneys who want to promote the independence of the judiciary, defend these judges and all the judges across America from unfair criticism, and also to help with educate the future leaders of our country. And that's why we're here today. To do that, we helped the teachers last year on Scholastic Justice for the People, all the people. We had 38,000 downloads by teachers across America of our Justice for the People program. And I encourage you to go to that website. Without further ado, at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our moderator, Karen Terry from Searcy Denny, and she's going to introduce the judicial panel that we've got today.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Good morning, everybody. I need to have a better one than he got. Good morning. Good morning. All right. Thank you. My honor and my privilege to introduce to you the Chief Justice of the Florida Supreme Court, the highest court in Florida, Chief Justice Barbara Periente, sitting right here in the middle. And she's done a phenomenal job for the citizens of Florida. And also Chief Justice Jonathan Gerber of the 4th District Court of Appeal. He's also doing a tremendous job for the people of Florida. And last but not least, Simone Rowe, who is a judge here in the 15th Judicial Circuit in Palm Beach County, and also doing a phenomenal job. So, take it away, Justice Periente, Jonathan Gerber, and Simone Rowe.
Well, I'm not going to say good morning. First, I'm going to put my mic on. How about that? I want to tell you how impressed I am to see this group of committed students and committed to learn about the justice system. And today we're here to celebrate our Constitution, but also to understand, as Dr. Robinson said, that our Constitution only works if the people, both as citizens, as students, and as judges, understand what the Constitution is supposed to do and how our government is structured. So what we're going to do is start with the first slide, and I don't know if on a split screen, because I'm not sure, everyone sees everything? Good. If I would turn it over to Judge Gerber just to talk about what does the Constitution do.
Well, good morning, everyone. You know, you see the Constitution in your classrooms, but it's really the most important document that we have in our government because it sets forth the framework of how our government operates. It sets up the three branches of government. That is the executive branch run by the president, the legislative branch run by Congress, and the judicial branch run by the Supreme Court. And it also defines what the powers of each of those three branches are. And probably most importantly, the Constitution protects our basic rights in the Bill of Rights. That is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution of the United States. And some would argue all the amendments that have come after that are certainly just as important as the Bill of Rights as well. So again, the U.S. Constitution provides this structure and the function of our government, sets forth the powers of our government, and also sets forth the limits of our government because we are governed by separation of powers. That is, each branch of government, while having its own powers, cannot overreach and seek to exercise the powers of the other branches.
So, first of all, I think that this group probably knows that there are three branches of government, but you should know that unfortunately among our citizens and voters, both future voters, non-voters, and present voters, they don't even understand the structure of government. So what you're learning in your classroom and hopefully going to apply it in your daily life and in your future life is very important. Now, you all have a copy of the Constitution of the United States. I'll sit down. But I want to tell you that this document is actually the Constitution of the state of Florida. And for those of you who are in high school that may be voting in November, do we have any high school students that are registered to vote here? We've got some. You will have on the ballot proposed amendments to the Constitution that you will have to vote either yes or no. And I urge you, because this would amend our Constitution in Florida to become informed about those amendments and what they might mean or might not mean. So that's very important. So now I'm going to ask a question, which is, what Constitution is this from? Citizens are guaranteed freedom of speech, of the press, of assembly, demonstration, and association. That young woman back there with the glasses, where is that from? It's from the First Amendment, and so it's from our Constitution. Does everyone think it's from our Constitution? All right, let's look at where it's from. It's actually from the Constitution of North Korea. Okay, North Korea, you've heard a lot about North Korea, so think about that. They actually have, it sounds like, more rights, because all we say is speech and assembly, but Korea says you can even have the right of demonstration. Now, let's go to the next slide. We know, let's see, is that the next? Oh, just one back. Let me just go back. Okay, North Korea is down at the bottom for civil rights, political rights, and civil liberties. So what we're going to be talking about is what's missing. You can have this wonderful document, the Constitution, and as Dr. Robinson said, when that Constitution was adopted, not only could African Americans not partake, but neither could women. In fact, only white men who were property owners were part of who we were. So we have come a long way, and we still have a long way to go. But the rights in the Constitution are only as good as having both citizens able to speak their mind and also having a judicial branch to protect your rights. And that's what's missing. So now you're going to maybe see the next trick question. So where is that from? It says, let's see. Can someone read it? Because I don't have my glasses.
Everyone shall have the right to privacy of correspondence, telephone communication, mail, cables, and other communications.
Now, you probably know that doesn't come from our Constitution because actually, and this is a subject of controversy, we don't have a right of privacy in our Constitution, an explicit right. Now, there is an explicit right of privacy in our Florida Constitution. So we have more rights of privacy in our Florida Constitution. Anyone want to guess where that right of privacy, where that's from?
There's more. Everyone shall be guaranteed the freedom of ideas and speech. The freedom of mass media shall be guaranteed.
Wow, that sounds great, right? That sounds like a country that might even be better than ours because there are more rights. So now, anyone want to guess what country that is? Anyone up here? Dr. Robinson? You don't want to guess?
We have a guess over here. Russia.
You are right. It comes from Russia. Wow. All right. And I think that that is a great history for you because even after the fall of the Soviet Union and the new constitution was adopted in Russia, we all know, and as you see from the standing in the world, Russia does not have most freedoms, and a lot of the repression that existed under the Soviet Union continues. And so we are now going to talk about why a constitution can be wonderful, but it's more than words, and that's what the theme of our topic is. So look at this, considerations in creating the U.S. Constitution. And again, if this was a smaller group, we spent a lot of time going back and forth. But you see there, we've got puppets. And actually, until the American Revolution, judges were appointed by the King of England. And if a judge did not do what the king wanted, it wasn't off with his head, or it wasn't her head because there were no women judges, but it was you were going to be removed from office. So really, there was no freedom for the colonies in terms of having a judiciary that could protect them. They were subject to the King of England, and that was one of the biggest complaints in for the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence. So let's see what then happened. Judge Rowe.
The U.S. Constitution provides the structure and function of the federal government while providing powers and limits to the three co-equal branches of government. What would the government look like if there was only one branch of government instead of three? Does anybody want to? Yes, ma'am. Right.
A tyranny?
Yes, exactly. Thank you for that. All right, as Judge Gerber indicated, our Constitution provides for three co-equal branches of government. That means each branch is established to check the other branch. Our founding fathers were wise to create the three branches of government, and as James Madison indicated, that is to ensure and to prevent any type of tyranny. Right, the one with the bucket. Oh, the three branches of government are the legislative, executive, and judicial branch.
And I want you to see this. We worked hard on this little visual about the branches because you see them having equal status, and because we are members of the judiciary, and I've been a member of the judiciary for 25 years, I'm very much aware how easy it is to denigrate the judiciary, and that's how Bill Price talked about how there are lawyers, but we also need citizens to defend our branch because we don't have a constituency.
All right, and this slide kind of encapsulates what we were talking about and what that young lady out there said. If we only had one bucket for all three branches, what would happen? If there was only one entity, for example, the executive branch, that could make the law, interpret the law, apply the law, and enforce the law, what would we have? The lady in the back arch said it just a little bit ago. It'd be tyranny.
Let's go. Which one is it? I'll do it. Oh, there it goes. It's all going in that bucket. I really like that visual. All into one bucket.
All right, so we've talked now about the three branches of government: the executive branch, led by the president, the legislative branch, run by Congress, and the judicial branch, run by the Supreme Court and maintained by justices and judges all across this country. So all of those branches have a duty to help protect our rights that are found in the Constitution, and specifically in the Bill of Rights. But which of those three branches do you think that comes into play the most between the president, the Congress, and the judicial branch? Which of those three branches do you think is most responsible for protecting our rights? Someone raise your hand. I saw a hand over on the right. Yeah.
The judiciary branch?
That's correct. And let's think about all the things that the judicial branch does to protect our rights. First and foremost, the judicial branch resolves disputes through a legal process. In other words, when people have disputes, we don't want them fighting in the streets or even fighting in the courtroom. We want them to be able to come to a very civilized place where they can be heard and have their position considered before a decision is made. And then what a judge does, or a justice does, is to interpret and apply the law. So as you can see, the legislature passes laws all the time, but there may be a question from time to time. Just what do those words actually mean? And when there's a question between two sides of what the words mean, it's the judge's job to interpret and apply the law. Another job we have is to determine if a law is unconstitutional, because the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. And while any legislature or the Congress may pass laws from time to time, if those laws are inconsistent with the Constitution prevails. So if someone believes that to be the case, their job is to come to a judge or justice whose job is to determine, is that law pass muster with the Constitution? And so above and beyond, our job is to safeguard the Constitution and the rights of the people, because that is the constant in our government. That is what binds us all as Americans, which is our abiding belief that the Constitution and the laws of the state are supreme, and no person is above the law.
I do want to just add on that. It takes, though, we can't reach out and take cases. We can't say, that doesn't seem right, so we're going to try to fix it. The legislature can do that, the executive branch can do it, but the judicial branch depends on people, companies, lawyers to bring that dispute to court. Oh, that's me. Okay, so this is something, and I hope that as you think about it and go back in your classrooms, that you really understand this lesson, because it's not an easy one for judges or for the population to understand, is that our branch was not intended to be a political or representative branch. So what does that mean as far as your rights or what the judges have to do? And we're going to talk about that a little bit later, about what considerations should go into making a decision as a judge. Oftentimes, those are very hard decisions. Okay, so you've got here, and actually has anyone visited Tallahassee? Just, it's so interesting. We used to have student groups were able to come up to Tallahassee, see the Supreme Court where I sit in Tallahassee, that's the legislature. It's not exactly the most attractive building, but that happens to be the legislative branch. Now, if you look at what happens with the legislative branch, they can be, and let me get my glasses on because I realize I can't see small print here. They can be influenced by public opinion or pressures. They can be influenced by political parties. That is, they can be, they run as a Republican or as a Democrat, and many times they will do what their party wants them to do. Judges in this state do not run, and you'll see on your ballot, there are some trial judges that are actually on the ballot. They don't run as a Republican or Democrat. And then you see all those people at the bottom. Now, if you came up to Tallahassee, you would note that when the legislature's in session, there are all these people, both citizens and lobbyists, going across the street from the Supreme Court to talk to their legislators about what's important to them. You come back across the street to where the Supreme Court of Florida is, and it's really very quiet because nobody other than those that are coming to visit just to see what the court looks like or to argue a case, they can't come over to me or say make an appointment and say, listen, we have this case that's coming up. We would like to talk to you about what's important. They can't do that. And also, nor can special interests. So the issue of there's a very big lobbyist, the National Rifle Association. They can go over and they lobby the legislature. But if we make a decision that's unpopular to the National Rifle Association because we think the law maybe is a proper law and doesn't violate the Constitution, the National Rifle Association can be very mad, but they don't have the final word. The courts do, and that's where we need protection when the opinion that we make is not one that might be popular for those in power. Because one thing, and I'm not sure we'll talk about this in a little bit, we're not there to serve the majority. We're there to protect the rights of those in the minority. And it may not just be African American or Hispanic. It may be somebody that has unpopular speech, speech that you don't like. We're there to protect freedom of speech. So that's a very important lesson of any of you in the future that are thinking of being attorneys. Anybody here thinking of being an attorney? All right, we've got several. Now, so how many of you think in the future you might be a judge? That's excellent, and I hope there's both women and minorities because we need diversity on the bench. So that's wonderful. It's not an easy job. So let's go to how judges do make decisions.
So when we're asked to make a decision, it's not as if that we just walk into court one day and say, what do I think is the right answer? We're bound to follow the law. So what is the law that we follow when we're making decisions? First and foremost is the United States Constitution. Again, that's the supreme law of the land. So anytime an issue has to do with a constitutional issue, we have to look to the United States Constitution and what its plain language says. We also look to the state constitution. If it's an issue having to do with our state law, any ruling that we make also has to be consistent with the Florida Constitution, which Justice Periente showed you a few moments ago. But many of the cases that we have don't necessarily involve a constitutional issue, either the U.S. Constitution or the state constitution. Many of them just have to do with the laws that are passed here in the state by the Florida legislature. So when that issue comes up, we look at the statute that's at issue, and we try and apply the plain language of the statutes as it's written. And only if the statute is ambiguous or it's unclear do we try and divine what the meaning of the words may be if it's not clear from the plain meaning of the words. So how do we do that as judges? Well, sometimes another thing we look at is we look at the decisions of courts that have looked at the same issue or a similar issue before us. So if the United States Supreme Court has looked at an issue having to do, for example, with the police searching someone's car, and that same type of issue comes before any of us as lower court judges, then we're bound to follow that law of the U.S. Supreme Court to the extent those cases may be similar. But we do have the power, if we think those cases are slightly different, to come to a different ruling. And that works its way all the way down the line. So if the Florida Supreme Court, on which Justice Perriente sits, makes a decision, my court, which is a lower court of appeal, or Judge Rowe's court is a trial court all around the state, we're all bound to follow those decisions of the higher court. And if my court makes a decision, then Judge Rowe's lower courts are designed to follow those decisions as well. So it's a very organized structure of government so that of deciding cases, so that if you as a person or as a lawyer comes to court, you can look at those prior cases and say, well, based on how cases have been decided by other courts in the past, this is how this case that I'm arguing or that I'm involved in should be decided. Now let's talk about what a judge should not look to in terms of making decisions. Judges, again, as Justice Perriente talked about a few moments ago, are not based on popular opinion. We don't take polls. You sometimes read in the newspaper about, or online, they say, let's take a poll of how a judge should rule on this case. We don't look at polls. And frankly, if the poll said one way, we're not going to necessarily take any care into what a poll may say, because our job is to follow the law, not popular opinion. As Justice Perriente mentioned ago, if we were to simply follow popular opinion, we would have no role in our government, and we would simply be obeying the will of the majority and not necessarily protecting the rights of the minority. So that's the things that we look at as judges. If we can go to the next slide, you'll see there, here's just an example of something that we have to decide. Let's say there was a law that was passed that said no vehicles are allowed in the park. And you're someone who goes to the park and you're in a wheelchair and it's motorized. Is that a vehicle? And well, I hear some people saying yes, and I hear some people saying no. Well, if you're the person in the wheelchair, you're going to want to argue to a court that this law doesn't apply to you because it wasn't intended to apply to you. It was intended to apply so that people don't drive big old cars and SUVs and trucks through a park where they might hit somebody. And it wasn't intended for someone who's in a motorized wheelchair who needs the ability to go through the park on that wheelchair. Otherwise, they can't enjoy the park like everybody else. So it's issues like that that we have to decide what these words mean, because someone, just as you did a second ago, may dispute what those words may mean. And words do matter. I know it's difficult for you to see this cartoon, but I'll read it to you. What it is, it's a man and a woman, and the woman is saying to the man, I've always thought it's weird that they say a defendant is innocent until proven guilty. And the man says back to her, well, weird? What's weird about it? And the woman says, well, technically, a defendant should be considered innocent unless proven guilty. And the man says, you know, I never really thought about it that way, until makes it seem that a finding of guilt is inevitable, meaning it's going to happen no matter what. And what the man ultimately says, it's a fine distinction, but an important one. From now on, I'm going to say innocent unless proven guilty. So again, this is a phrase that you've probably heard a million times on TV when someone says they're innocent until proven guilty. But that's an important distinction to be made so that we understand that words do matter.
Now, we were talking about the Constitution, and they clearly set out rights. If it was clear what the founders of those that passed the Bill of Rights intended, and they had detailed instructions, it would be very easy for the courts to follow. So we start with what we had talked about as far as the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. So let's go and say, well, what's speech? Does it change the meaning, or does the meaning of the Constitution change over time? Now, you may have heard that there are those at the U.S. Supreme Court that think that speech is frozen in time to mean what it meant back in 1787 or 1789 when the Constitution was passed. Is any of you on social media? Any of you? Any of you social media, like everybody?
Not one.
Anyone not on social media? Right? No, there's somebody. Wow, there's a couple that are not. So maybe no Facebook, but you may communicate or may see speech that is communicated not in writing, but through social media, through mass media. So is that speech? Well, of course, you would say speech is much broader than just the words that you speak. Let's think of another one. And this one we talk about, that's the Fourth Amendment that Judge Gerber mentioned, protection from unreasonable searches and seizures. If there's one area of the law that is the most problematic as far as interpreting the rights of individuals, like you are stopped, those of you that are driving, and I'm sure others that will drive, you know, what can law enforcement do? Can they have you get out of the car? Did you have to, do they have to have cause to stop your car? Can they come into your house? Do they have to have a search warrant? What's unreasonable? Do you think, is that a fixed phrase? So unreasonable itself is difficult to define, and that's why judges have to determine on an individual basis, but then look to prior cases, what is unreasonable. Another one that we talk about a lot of times, no excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. So what is excessive and what is cruel and unusual? Well, a very important decision that affected many, many children in this state was a decision from the U.S. Supreme Court several years ago that said juveniles, that's under 18, that were committed a crime and they were sentenced in adult court and they were given a life sentence, that for the juvenile was cruel and unusual. Now, so many, and our state, unfortunately, led the nation in having more juveniles given life sentence and locked up for the rest of their life. Now, I'm not saying, since I, on the Supreme Court, have to deal with cases involving the death penalty, there was a time in Florida where the death penalty could be imposed on 17-year-olds. The U.S. Supreme Court said, no, that's cruel and unusual, anything under 18. You know, someone turns 18, they're given the death penalty. This is something that courts grapple with. Now, there are some judges that think that means what it meant at the time that the Constitution was written. There are others that say, no, it has to be evolving with time. Now, this is also the equal protection of the law. Now, do you know what amendment that's in? Anybody know what amendment, equal protection? Yes. The 14th Amendment, and that obviously was not passed when the original Bill of Rights were passed. So that's very important. What is equal protection? Who gets the protection of the law? And what does it mean to treat people equally? Should women and men get the same insurance premiums because they're protected, they're the same? Well, what if women, which happen to be the case, are better drivers? Yes, they are. Not me saying it, I'm just saying that's what the insurance data shows. Should those premiums be different? So those are sometimes issues that come before the court that are very, very difficult.
And as a judge and as part of the judicial branch, we do have difficult decisions to make. But our guiding force and our guiding light is the Constitution. It is our role to protect.
Next one. Yeah.
It's our role to protect and interpret the laws that are in place. This is my pleasure and privilege to present these two cases because this shows how our laws have evolved and how we as a country have evolved and how we have rights that weren't really afforded to people that look like me ended up being afforded to people that look like me. This was in 1954 when segregation was rampant. 1/3 of the states in the United States had segregation laws, which means that black people or people of color could not mingle with people that were Caucasian. And the same held true for the schools. And a man by the name of Oliver Brown, who was a welder in Kansas, had a daughter who had to walk, I want to think it was like 7 miles to school, when there was a school that was a mile away. And that was because in Kansas they had a separate but equal statute that required that folks that look like me could not go to school with folks that say look like Judge Gerber or Justice Pariente. And our first African-American Supreme Court Justice, Thurgood Marshall, was the chief counsel for the NAACP at the time, and he took on the case with the NAACP and, along with 4 other states, petitioned the Supreme Court. And all of the states had already imposed the law that says that the separate but equal was constitutional. Justice, he's deceased now, but Justice Marshall went up to the Supreme Court and argued that separate but equal was not equal. And 9 folks that look like Judge Gerber, which Justice Pariente was talking about, that's usually what the Supreme Court was back in that day, unanimously agreed that separate but equal was not equal, and changed the laws and required all of those 17 states that would not allow blacks and whites to go to school together. So the people that are sitting next to you that are of a different race or a different color, you couldn't go to school together. They changed the laws. 9 Supreme Court justices that don't look like me changed that law. It shows that the people that follow the law are not necessarily liberal or conservative. They follow the law, and wherever the law leads them, that's what they end up doing. The U.S. Justice Department also supported Justice Marshall in that case. That led to Brown 2, which required that all the states impose that law, which allowed for integration of schools with all deliberate speed. That case showed that judges make decisions that are unpopular. And the Chief Justice, Warren, who wrote the opinion, a lot of people wanted to impeach him, to remove him from the bench, because he wrote that opinion that allowed for folks that look like me to go to school with other people of other races. So that is a prime example of how the laws can affect us personally, and also how justices, when they are following the law, it's not liberal or conservative, it's not white or black, it's following the law and doing the right thing. Another case that is a pleasure and a privilege for me to present is another case that affects me personally, and that's the case of Loving versus Virginia. Now we're going to go a couple years later into 1967, and again, 1/3 of the states in the United States had a law. It's called misogynistic law, which you'll look it up. It took me a little bit to pronounce it. It required, or it did not allow, people that look like me to marry folks of another race. That was against the law back in 1967 in 17 states. And 2 people, Mildred and Richard Loving. Mildred was a mixed race African and Native American individual, fell in love with a man named Richard, who was a Caucasian man. They wanted to get married. They lived in Virginia. They could not get married in Virginia. They had to go to Washington, D.C. to get married. They went to Washington, D.C. They got married. Mildred wanted to come back to her home state. They moved back to Virginia. 5 weeks later, the Virginia State Police arrested them for marrying, interracial marriage. The attorneys at the time encouraged them to plead guilty. They pled guilty to violating the laws of Virginia, and their punishment was that they had to leave the state of Virginia and move to another state. They could not come back to Virginia for 25 years. Mildred, because her family lived there, was homesick, and she petitioned Robert F. Kennedy to find a way so that she could overturn this law so she could come back to her home state and be with her family. Robert F. Kennedy referred her to the ACLU, where 2 attorneys took on that cause and petitioned again the U.S. Supreme Court, where again 9 justices agreed that love is love, and if you wanted to marry a person of another race, that is your constitutional right through the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. And that affected me because otherwise I would not be able to marry my husband if if the U.S. Supreme Court did not rule in the Loving versus Virginia case. So those are the two cases that are very close to my heart for that reason.
Do you just love that they picked a plaintiff by the name of Loving for that? And what's amazing, that was 1967. Now, that seems a long, long time ago for everyone here. I don't know how many years before you were born. But I was in law school in Washington in 1970, and the lawyer that argued it, who did it without a fee, pro bono, it's called, without charging, was actually one of my law professors. And so it was near and dear. It seems so absolutely appropriate, but you take these cases like Brown v. Board of Education that Judge Rowe is saying, well, they were doing the right thing, and you put it into our modern day political realm, and I would suspect there would be people saying there's nothing wrong with separate but equal. There is no reason for the Supreme Court to get involved in this and be activist, and you will hear those kind of phrases, and you really need to be thinking, is somebody trying to push their own agenda? So you've got to be smart. You've got to be able to also read the cases. If your teachers, I think Loving would be a very good case for you to read in high school students. So I'm going to so those two cases were 9-0. The next case that we are going to mention is a case called Texas v. Johnson. Now, that took place in 1989. It was brought to the court in 1989. But during the Vietnam War, anyone heard of the Vietnam War? Well, it was, again, a very controversial law, and there was a draft where young men were being drafted, and people who wanted to protest the law started to burn the American flag. Now, they didn't burn it around people, around like a forest or something where something could catch on fire. There was no danger. But, that's the symbol of our of our country, right? The flag. So to burn the flag was something that enraged most Americans. And this is what happened, is that decision actually was not unanimous. It was 5-4. Again, U.S. Supreme Court has just 9 members. Our court has 7 members. We always have odd numbers because if there's hopefully is not a tie if somebody is not sitting on the case. So 5-4, they decided this opinion, and what they said was, if there's a bedrock principle underlying the First Amendment, it's that government may not prohibit the expression of an idea simply because society, that's all of you, finds the idea offensive or disagreeable. Now, this issue comes up a lot because we're finding times where people, there's a lot more hate speech going on. There are people that are saying terrible things about blacks, Hispanics, Jewish people, and it's offensive, but it's speech. And though we find it offensive, do we say, no, you can't disparage someone else? This is what makes our democracy so different from every other country in the world. And here is what the reason there was another person in the majority. Let's go to the first one. Yeah. You got the. Yeah. Justice Scalia. those of you that are going to study the law, go to, or studying it in your law-related studies, Justice Scalia is considered, quote, a conservative judge. But what he said is, I think, says so much. If I were king, I would not allow people to go about burning the American flag. However, we have a First Amendment which says the right of free speech shall not be abridged. So just think about that. What he's saying is, I don't agree with that that action. I wouldn't do it. I find it offensive. But it is freedom to express ideas that are not popular. Because if all you do is go around and you figure out what's the popular opinion, you express that idea, well, there's no reason for anyone to get upset about it. So I think this is very important in our present-day society where a lot of people are coming on campuses and they're being booed down. Should you give those people a right to speak and hear their views, even though they're offensive and different than yours? Okay, well, you can go to the next.
So what would happen if the world was different, if we did not have a judicial branch and judges who were willing to enforce the law? Well, what would happen is, just as Periente just mentioned, is you'd have basically popular opinion would always control. That is, the majority of people would always have power over the minority of people. You've seen from time to time protests in the streets where there's one group on one side and one group on the other side of the street, and unfortunately, tragically, violence erupts as a result. Again, without the power of the judicial branch to enforce the law, it would be who is the stronger side, who is the louder side, who is the richer side, who has more money and resources. The rich would control over the poor, the strong over the weak, the loud over the silent. That is the world in which we would live if we did not have the opportunity to come to court to have our rights enforced by a judge, even if we are the quiet, the ones who does not have as much money, the ones who does not have as loud a voice, have the opportunity to have their voices heard in court. So when you come to court, what are you looking for in a judge? Maybe just by show of hands with a microphone, or just call out. What do you think you would want to see when you go to court? How would you want the judge to act?
Here we go to your left, Judge Gerber.
Equality and fairness.
Okay, you'd want the judge to be fair and treat everyone equally. Anyone else?
We got another one over here, Judge Gerber.
Yeah.
Kind of branching off what he said, you know, a judge that isn't really based off, like, I don't know, if like a company supports him or like a certain political group backs him, I wouldn't really want, or him or her, I wouldn't want them to be influenced by them or easily influenced by something.
Right, you'd want them to be independent.
Yeah.
You'd want them to be impartial. So they're not going to be, you'd want a judge who's going to make a decision not based on who's going to contribute to their reelection campaign, but because they're willing to follow the law, right? Good. Okay, what else would you want to see in a judge? Yeah.
I would like the judge to be transparent and understanding.
Right, that's great. You'd want to know that the judge listened to what you had to say. And when the judge made their decision, that the judge told you, here's how I'm making my decision. So you didn't think it was just arbitrary, like the judge flipped a coin. Good. How about one more person? What else would you like to see in a judge? Yeah, in the back.
Someone who isn't biased and prejudiced in any way.
Fantastic. That's exactly right. Someone who's not biased and prejudiced in any way. Very good.
And Judge Rowe, just looking at these qualities, because Judge Rowe was appointed as a judge several years ago, and to me, I have now worked with her, even though we're not on the same court, and she epitomizes to me, as does Judge Gerber, Judge Delgado, Judge Alvarez, what we want to see in especially our trial judges, where you deal with the people all day long.
So some of the things I have experienced and in the interview process have learned to express what you want to look for in a judge and what I want to be in a judge is have the proper legal experience. And as you grow, and as Judge Gerber is a 4th DCA judge and Justice Pariente is a Supreme Court judge, have a judicial experience, have some knowledge about the job that you're doing. Your educational background, obviously doing well in school now is a good thing if you want to be a good judge. Character and ethics, I think the lady in the back there indicated that as well. Somebody also said about transparency, because you want to make sure that the person that's making a decision about your life or your case is also not being biased. And if they have something in their background that may have affected their decision, you want to know about that. That's what many of the judges on the trial court, Judge Delgado and I have to make disclosures at times. And let other people know what is in our background that they may need to know in order to help them understand whether we should be sitting on that particular case. Obviously, the judge's ethics, their temperament. I've learned you have to have a lot of patience on the bench. But yes, your temperament is very important. Your disciplinary record, community service, things like what we're doing here today and going out in the community and meeting people like you and meeting maybe your parents in other settings. Letting everybody know who we are and what we do as part of our service to the community, and obviously being impartial and respecting of our colleagues, both our colleagues on the bench and our colleagues on the bar, which is why I'm very thankful that ABOTA invited us all to be here as part of this process.
And then we've really, I think, the next one is what factors should not influence the judge's decision. I think we've pretty well covered it, but again, if you want to just either shout out or back there. Yes, you stand up, you raised your hand.
Sexuality, race, anything that can change a judge's opinion. If they're against it, anything that they're against should not influence their decision because someone is for it.
They may have a personal opinion about something. How about anyone in the middle here? I think these are the middle schoolers. Yes, back there.
Bias from the media shouldn't affect the judge's
That's
decision.
a big one. I think that's great. Excellent.
Justice Pariente.
Do you know how hard that is if as you're sitting there as a judge and you're reading what the editorials say? I have to make some very important decisions with my colleagues about issues coming up, and I'll read the Palm Beach Post, New York Times, and I just have to divorce what they think from what I have to rule. Yes, back here.
A judge's moral views.
Well, the morality, yes. And I think, honestly, as you say that, I will tell you this, and anybody else back there about what shouldn't influence?
I would say the judge's personal views.
The personal views, and wait, we got one more, a young man here with the blue shirt and the tie.
I would prefer a judge that actually looks at the case and how the Constitution applies to that case, not just the person and what they are, what they look like, what they feel, what their beliefs are, the case and the Constitution applying to it.
And this is a very important thing, because I'll tell you something that's a very sad fact. There have been studies now done, judges who think they're not biased, but we're seeing, because the media has actually looked at it, that black defendants charged with the same crime get longer sentences. This is what Dr. Robinson was talking about. We call it implicit bias because the judge is there saying, I think I'm being fair. It may even be a black judge who's sentencing that way. Maybe it's because the way that defendant looked, the way his or her hair is, the way they come into the courtroom, it's implicit. We even find, this is why to me it's so important that we have women and there's diversity on the court, because we found that studies have shown that if a judge actually has a daughter, that judge will be more attuned to issues involving women's rights. So we don't think this should influence our decision, but we've got to be very careful about it. So we're coming to the end, and I want to just mention a website for you. And for the teachers and those out there. I'm part of the National Association of Women Judges, which is a group not only of women judges but men judges. But after I had an experience in 2012 in this state where myself and two other colleagues, the other woman, Justice Quince, who's African American, and one male, we were attacked, not based on our ethics, but because there was a feeling they wanted us off the court. It's merit retention, and some of you will be voting on that in November, yes or no. I felt it was important that we went out to the public to talk about what matters as a judge. And so this website has some wonderful materials about how to evaluate a judge, what shouldn't be considered, and that you could print out for your classrooms. And then, again, I know some of you said no social media, but if you would like, you can connect with us either on the website or on Facebook. You could become a friend. We'd love that. We need friends. So that would be terrific. I will also say, as a plug to my own court, we have our oral arguments, and actually when those oral arguments take place, it is streaming live on Facebook when they occur. So if there's a particularly interesting oral argument, there is maybe some way that your teachers could stay attuned and be able to actually watch it. But they're also archived, so you could watch a very important oral argument if you'd like. Finally, the last part of this, and then we will, our portion is finished, is a short video about Constitution Day. Hopefully it goes. Is there something to... Back a slide. See, we were so... There it is. That might be... Coming up.
Our Constitution is celebrated as the backbone of our democracy, but our Constitution cannot survive without fair and free courts.
Americans look to their courts for fairness, free from the influence of politics and partisanship.
Learn how you can help keep our courts fair and free at the Informed Voters Fair Judges website, or join the conversation on our Facebook page.
Our courts are what they must always be, fair and free.
Okay.
All right, thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. Next up, we have retired Judge Ron Alvarez from the 15th Judicial Circuit, who was a judge in charge of Juvenile Division, and Judge Luis Delgado, who now is in charge of that same very division. And they're going to talk about that the Constitution must have compassion.
Lou and I had a vote, and he won, so he gets to go first, and I go last. Okay, Judge Delgado, you're on, sir.
Thank you, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. And so I do see some people that I go and visit some of the schools periodically, and so it's nice to see that the schools are still very much engaged. Just to piggyback on what was just said, if you've been in my courtroom or if you've heard me talk, one of the things that I say is that our courtrooms are very special places. And what was just discussed is our system. And it's very special. It's very delicate. It's something that we really should be mindful to protect. The examples that were given about other countries, like Korea and Russia, the example I'll give you is just because you have a car doesn't mean it works. And just because you have a car doesn't mean it works well. You've got to take care of it. And there are places in this world where when you have disputes, when someone has denied you rights or abused you, there's not much you can do about it. But we have these very special places where you can go in and ask for protection of the law and get it. So our courtrooms are very, very special places, but they are very, very delicate, because just because you have them doesn't mean they work. it's very important for the people to make sure that it is protected. I'm supposed to talk to you about compassion and the law. And so there's a case that I do want to talk about with you. It's older, but anybody here 15 years old? Raise your hand so I can see. Okay, so there are some 15-year-olds. But imagine you're 15 years old and somebody's making prank phone calls. And they make enough of these prank phone calls where the police are called and they show up, and this 15-year-old is arrested. And when the 15-year-old's arrested, his parents are never told. He gets set for a trial that his accuser does not need to show up for. He's found guilty. And at 15 years old, he's sentenced to be in a place until he's an adult. So about 3 years. He has no right to appeal. Anybody think that's fair? Right. And so it's built into our system, because if something like this were to happen, where would you go? Probably one of these very special places that we just talked about. And that's what happened. So this child was sentenced to almost 3 years for something that, if he had been an adult, could only have been punished with 60 days or a $50 fine. And so this is not fair. You've got to go somewhere. So he goes to the Supreme Court of the United States, and they agree. As a result of that particular case, the way that we address cases for children all over the country is very different. It's because we have these very, very special places. What I tell people is that this child walked into a courtroom, asked for protection of the law, and he walked out with justice. That is a very powerful example of how important our system is. Something worth protecting. It's something that Americans should protect. And I use that word because I want you to know that America looks like me. It looks like Judge Alvarez. It looks like Judge Rowe, Justice Periente, Judge Gerber. But it also looks like every single one of you. And if we have this very special, very delicate system that works here, then it's important for every single one of us to make sure that it is protected so that we can receive protection of the law. If we don't, then I think that laws that lack compassion could become the norm. Because the judges that enforced these laws in Arizona in the 60s were following the laws that were created by their legislature, signed by their governor. They were in conflict with our supreme law. And so it's very important that we have places that are very, very special that we protect so we can go seek protection of the law.
Am I on? Oh, my. Okay, so Judge Delgado and I, before I retired, served in the juvenile court. We did juvenile delinquency work, also dependency work. And one of the things that wasn't mentioned and probably is unique to the juvenile court is the issue, the question of, do you care about other people? Can you be compassionate? And also the idea of never giving up on yourself or others. And kids have a tendency to give up on themselves because they don't know the talents that they have, the abilities that they have. And I insisted in the 15 years that I served in the juvenile division that I would never give up on a child. She was 12 years old, and we're going to call her Veronica because that's her name. Just happens to be. She was 12, and she came into my division, juvenile division, courtroom 2A, every month, every other month. battery, hitting a law enforcement officer, domestic battery, hitting her mother, petty theft, all types of violations. I would see her almost every month. And the one thing you never want to do as a kid is have a juvenile judge know you by name. But I knew her by name. So one of the things that I sanctioned, her punishment for Veronica, was that she had to write me a letter 3 times a week. And I told her, very point blank, you can write anything you want. I want to know what you're doing, how you're doing, what you're doing. My theory was that if she was writing a letter, she couldn't be hitting anybody at that time. So she stayed in my division 1997, 1998, and then I didn't hear from her again. Didn't hear anything about her until 2005. When I got a phone call, I got off the bench and my judicial assistant, Ms. Morales, gave me one of those pink slips. I don't have them anymore, but says this young lady called. Her name is Veronica. She'd like to talk to you. I said, Veronica, I remember that name really for a lot of reasons. So I called her. And I said, you know, how are you doing? I didn't see you after 1998. I guess you're doing fine. She says, well, I did all right for a while. I said, well, okay, that's great. But then I got into some real trouble. I committed 2 felonies, 2 second-degree felonies, which is about as major as you want to get. One was burglary of an occupied dwelling, and the second one was grand theft. And they filed my charges in adult court, not juvenile court, adult court. Now I'm thinking, oh boy, this is not going to be a good ending at all. He said, well, the judge gave me juvenile sanctions, which meant that the judge said, well, you know, you're still a kid, 17, so I'm going to send you to a level 10 program in the juvenile division. A level 10 is a prison just like any other prison, but it's for young people, adolescents, people up to 17 years of age. It has the razor wire, the electronic door shutting. You can't go out. Said, okay, so you're sent to a level 10. Yes. She said, well, I completed that level 10 in 18 months, which is the minimum amount of time you can stay in that program. I'm saying, yeah, that's fantastic. It's great. And then I got a scholarship to play softball at the junior college. Well, I'm thinking, story's looking up. And I got my AA degree from the community college at that time, and I just finished my BS degree from FAU. And I think, oh, this is fantastic. So, and next month I'm starting law school. Whoa, this story is really, really good, right? Okay. So we talked a little bit more, and I said, well, you know, I really appreciate you calling and giving me this information, but just exactly why are you calling? Do you need something? She said, no. I just wanted to thank you. And I usually cry, and I'm going to cry too. Okay, so anyway, I said, well, thank me for what? She said, well, remember those letters? I said, oh, yeah, the letters. You mean the 3 times a week? She said, yes. She said, I figured you wanted to violate me because you knew I couldn't do it. I said, well, that wasn't the reason exactly, but I didn't share what the real reason was. She said, well, I sent you one letter about my dog being mauled. He'd been bitten by a neighbor's dog, and I had to take him to the vet. He had to get medicine. And then one day, I go to the mailbox, and there's a letter from the 15th Judicial Circuit. And as a juvenile delinquent, you never want to get a letter from the 15th Judicial Circuit, right? As she said, I knew I screwed up, I violated, he's going to take me into custody. But it was a letter from you, and it was written on legal paper, handwritten, expressing the concern about my dog. Take care of him, take him to the vet, make sure he gets the medicine. And I'm thinking, big deal. What's the big deal about the letter? And the big deal about the letter was, as she explained to me, her father was a drug dealer, her mother was an addict, and at that point in her life, she figured no one cared about her. But when she got my letter, excuse me, she said, he really cares about me. All right, so Veronica and I stayed in touch, and we're very, very good friends right now. All have been since she called me in 2005. She went to law school. She graduated from law school. Then she took the Florida bar, and she passed the Florida bar, and then she called me. She said, you know, I'm going to apply to be admitted to the Florida bar, but I don't think they're going to admit me. I said, why? She said, well, I got my criminal record, my juvenile record, and it's an inch thick. It's about this thick. She said, I've hired a lawyer to represent me. I said, well, what's the lawyer say about your chances? She says, well, he says I only have a 30% chance of getting into the bar, being admitted. I said, well, first of all, fire the lawyer. And in my opinion, you have at least a 70% chance of getting in. Well, she had to go through a special hearing to get admitted. And it was shortly after the election of 2012, I was sitting on the couch, and I get this call from Veronica. I've been admitted to the Florida bar. This is a Thursday night. I said, well, come on. Tomorrow morning, come to my courtroom, and I'll swear you in. She said, well, no, it'll be too quick. So in the meantime, we scheduled for Monday morning. I got a hold of Chandra Bill, who used to be with Channel 5 here. And I said, Chandra, and Chandra had been interested in Veronica's story for a long time. By Monday morning, we had 3 TV stations and a newspaper covering the swearing in of Veronica in courtroom 2A. The lesson is, Veronica never gave up on herself. I never gave up on Veronica. And please, never give up on yourselves. Thank you so much.
Made me cry. That was excellent. Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from the Malcolm Cunningham Senior Bar Association. I think they're going to put on a skit, if I'm not mistaken. One person, one vote. Take it away.
Morning, everyone. Still awake? Yeah. All right. All right, my name is Nick Johnson. I'm with the Cunningham Bar Association. Many of you probably have never heard of it. It's an organization here in Palm Beach County made up mostly of African-American attorneys whose goal and mission it is to promote diversity amongst the judges and among the attorneys in our community. I want to thank the Palm Beach County School Board for having us here, as well as ABOTA for allowing us to take part in this amazing event. You all are truly privileged to be here, and I'm happy that we are able to share this day with all of you. Justice Pariente and Judge Romy have touched on some of these topics, so forgive me if I repeat a couple of things that they said, but it's worth emphasizing. In 1776, when the Declaration of Independence was signed, the right to vote was granted to only men, and you had to own property, and you had to be 21, and you had to be white. Now, looking around this room, that would eliminate probably 90% of us if that law remained the same. In 1856, the United States became the first nation to expand the vote to all men, regardless of property ownership, who were white. Obviously, this didn't include men who were not white, and this did not include women. It wasn't until 1870 that non-white male citizens were granted the right to vote in the 15th Amendment to the Constitution, which declared the right of citizens to vote shall not be denied by any state due to race, color, or previous condition of servitude. However, those who were allowed to vote felt threatened and incorporated a variety of discriminatory methods to significantly reduce the level of voting. After citizen protests, marches, incarcerations, and even loss of life, especially in the 1960s, some of the rights promised in the 15th Amendment were finally realized with the passing of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. It's important to note that the 15th Amendment did not grant the right to vote to women. Women were granted the right to vote in 1920. As you can see, whether you were a white male who did not own property, a non-white male, or a woman who was at least 21 years old, the right to vote was not freely or automatically granted to those who were citizens of the United States. So what does that all mean? How does that affect you today? I saw some hands go up with people who are 18, registered to vote. Hopefully, if you will turn 18 before November and you have enough time to register to vote, I hope you will do so. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to introduce to you Mr. Concerned Citizen, who's being played by McKinley Augustine, who is one of our attorneys here in Palm Beach County. He is a parent who contacts his state representative, who is being played by Mr. Samuel Walker, because he's concerned about his inability to monitor his child's activities on Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram. What else is left? Anything? Thank you. Clearly, I'm not as versed as you guys are on those. Mr. Augustine is very familiar with Facebook, and he wants all other social media platform usage to be banned until his child reaches the age of 18. And so he calls up his state representative. Ring, ring.
Hello, is this Mr. Smith?
Yes, how can I help you, sir?
Mr. Smith, let me tell you, I don't like all this Instabook, Facegram, Snap, or Tweet that's going on. My daughter's only 13 years old, and she's on social media constantly.
Let me interrupt you for a second. Are you registered to vote?
Yeah, you better believe it. I registered to vote when I was 18, and I voted in every election since.
Okay, sir, how can I help you?
Mr. Smith, I was thinking, is there any way we could restrict kids' use of social media until they turn about 18 years old?
Well, I've gotten several calls from concerned citizens just like you. Let me see what I can do.
The state representative checks to see whether Mr. Augustine has voted. He's verified that he has voted, and he subsequently introduces the bill. The bill is passed by both houses and must go to the public for a vote. Now, we have our affected citizen, Miss Shayla Walden here, who is 18 years old. She uses Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter multiple times daily. She had Facebook a long time ago, but Facebook is for old people, so now she's using Instagram. And she hears about this proposed law that's going to be passed, but she laughs it off with her friends and believes it's ridiculous, and there's no chance that this vote could ever get passed. Well, lo and behold, it's submitted to the public for a vote. Miss Walden stays home. She doesn't vote. Her friends don't vote. And the law is passed, much to her dismay. Of course, there's no such law, thank God. But there are laws that are passed that affect us on a daily basis. And if we are going to preserve what those before us fought for and have our voices heard, the only way to do so is to register to vote, go to the polls, and cast your ballot. Otherwise, you're going to allow other people to speak for you. In closing, I heard a quote recently, last week. It said the largest threat to our democracy is not Russian hackers or what we see going on in the media. It's indifference. It's choosing not to participate. It's skepticism, thinking that your vote doesn't count. And I hope you'll take a valuable lesson away from this today. Thank you.
All right, we have a few minutes left before everybody has to head for the buses. So this is your chance, your favorite part of the program, for questions. Now, I know you've prepared these questions. We've got speakers out there. Let's state your name, the school you're from, and then get the question on record because this is being videotaped. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Errol Rodriguez. I'm a sophomore at Spanish River. And I was wondering, how is it like to be a judge? Just like any one of you.
Everyone's looking at me. That's being a judge is an amazing experience as a public service, and where you feel that you can make a difference. Now, what Judge Delgado and Judge Alvarez did and Judge Delgado does, I have told trial judges that, in my view, the most important courts are the juvenile delinquency and dependency. But I feel very fortunate to be on the highest court in our state and have a chance to make decisions that are what I hope to be fair and impartial, protective of individual rights. So it's a great privilege, but truthfully, because of mass media and social media, you often feel like no matter what you do, you're not going to make, not only aren't you going to make everyone happy, you'll probably make at least half those not happy. And I just want to say one thing about what the Cunningham Bar Association did. I was on the court when we had a case called Bush v. Gore. Anyone hear about that case? It was the 2000 presidential election. Do you know how many votes separated in Florida President Bush from then Vice President Gore? Anyone know the numbers? It was less than, oh, someone knows back there. It was less than 1,000 votes. It was like 684 votes. So if you don't think your vote counts, and it counts at a local level, if you don't, I have never not voted in an election. Each one of you, that is your sacred right as citizens. So for me as a judge, I feel very privileged. But I really look at, first of all, the teachers and you students. You're our future. And for me, it's a privilege, but it's a privilege to be with you today.
One of the things I enjoyed most being a judge was when I was a trial judge. Before I became on the Court of Appeals doing appeals like Justice Pariente does, I was a trial judge like Judge Rowe, Judge Delgado, and Judge Alvarez. And most of the work we do as trial judges is jury trials, where people, citizens, come in and sit in judgment of other people's lives. And so people like you, when you become adults, are going to be summoned one day somewhere in this country, wherever you may live, to come to a courthouse and serve as a juror. And that may be your only experience in your entire lifetime where you are coming to a courthouse for some reason. That is to sit in judgment of other people's lives. And that's an incredibly important responsibility. So what I enjoyed most was when people would come into court, I would remind them of all the lessons that you were taught at this age when you were in school by your teachers about the importance of civic responsibility, of knowing the law, of following the law. Because this was the time in life when your country, your community, your fellow citizens are calling upon you to follow the law and make sure that the Constitution and the laws are followed. And that's an incredibly important responsibility. And when you see the look, when I see the look on jurors' faces, and you will someday be jurors and have that look on your face, you will remember the teachers that are with you here today that taught you these lessons, and you're going to want to live up to the promise that you gave to them as their students, that you are going to be following the law and being good citizens for all of us. So thank you.
We have another question over here.
So this question is directed for Judge Delgado. Well, my name is Isaiah McGraw. I'm at the Atlantic Criminal Justice Academy, and my question is, for the 15-year-old with the prank calls, my advisors always told me to get the facts for all the cases. And I was wondering, how many times did he call? What were the content set of the call? And who did he call? And shouldn't we have some compassion for the victim?
Yeah. No, those are really good questions. There are two sides to every story. So he did call very, very many times. And the phone calls were very, very offensive. And the victim was not happy. A lot of what we do is a balance. At the end of the day, there are phone calls. He didn't do anything more than the phone calls. And as disturbing as they were, 3 years was probably excessive at that time. But there are two sides to every single story. And part of what I have to do in the Delinquency and Dependency Division is listen to all of it and make the decision, because I don't have a jury. And so I'm very careful to make sure that anybody who has something to present or something to say gets heard, so that I can make the best possible decision at that time. Because it is an incredible, incredible responsibility. I don't take it lightly. I appreciate how serious it is, because I don't think there's anything more valuable than children. I think all children have worth, all children have value, all children have incredible potential. And as I make these decisions, I am directly affecting the lives of children. And so you do bring up a good point. There are there's two sides to every story. It's very important to weigh them all carefully and make the best decision you can.
Thank you.
We have a question back here.
Wait a second, I just want to add one thing, please. Because, over 25 years, I heard you say, what about the victim? And in many of these cases, whether it's a juvenile case or an adult case, of course there's a victim. But the issue really is the punishment, like if it was 3 years in a juvenile detention facility, is that really going to solve what was causing, first of all, the underlying issues with this juvenile, and also what he did and harmed the victim? So there's a concept of restorative justice, and many of I know at Palm Beach Lakes, you're involved in that, where there's victim-offender gets together, because you have to understand your actions have consequences. But oftentimes, a stricter punishment doesn't really help the offender or the victim. So those all have to be balanced. I don't know if any of you were involved in teen court. Any of you do that? It's all about making sure that the victim, that there is some sanction that will help the victim, whether it's in a shoplifting or something graffiti in a school, that they're made whole. So that's a very important point, something I care a great deal about. Thank you.
We have another question from this side of the room.
Good morning. My name is Christiane, and I'm from Santa Lucia's Criminal Justice Academy. As an aspiring criminal defense attorney, I was wondering, when you go to law school, of course, when you first go to college, would it be better, considering the amount of writing and reading you do as an attorney and a judge, would it be better to get a degree from political science or English?
My degree is my undergraduate degree is in broadcast journalism and psychology. So my suggestion to you is find what you really like to do in undergraduate school, pursue that passion, because that's the path that you're going to end up following, and then everything else will sort of work its way out. So do well in high school, do well in college, and then take the LSATs and proceed with your path.
All right. We've got some questions right here. Let's hear what school you're from.
Hi, my name is Olivia Howard. I'm from Spanish River High School. Given that in this day and age, a lot of controversial cases are tied to more morality, like the concept of gay marriage and gun reform and stuff like that, how do you disbar your own personal views and your own emotions from deciding on cases, given that it's more based on law rather than your personal views? How do you find a way to take emotion out of it?
I have to do that constantly. I think we at the Supreme Court get the most controversial cases. We get the death cases. I have personal views about the death penalty, but that is the sign, that is what the essence of a judge is, because if all we do is take what our personal opinions are, we will bring the public will lack confidence. So it's critical. Now, you mentioned gay marriage. That was a decision of the United States Supreme Court. In 2010, it was very unpopular. It has now become more of an understanding that that is part of the same kind of cases that brought Loving versus Virginia about who do you marry. And you say gun control. You see, that's where it's up to the legislature to pass the laws, and that's when the Cunningham Bar Association talked about lobbying your legislators, responsible gun control, what happens on school campuses. So then it's up to us, if a law is passed and someone challenges it, to look at it. But we don't get involved in whether the law should have been passed, whether it's bad policy. We have to go and really look at that and say, does it violate the Constitution? When you do that intellectually, you separate your I don't know which brain it is, but your emotions from the intellectual part of the job. But still having, and I think what Judge Alvarez and Judge Delgado said, having compassion, understanding that every case that we decide, even though we just have the record, involves real life people, and it has consequences. Our opinions have consequences for individuals, and I'm always mindful of that.
Go ahead.
My name is Oliver Desir from Spanish River, and I was wondering, do you think punishments such as the death penalty are more emotional based, and should that be applied to our legal system?
Oh, I can speak freely. Yes, I now have the right of free speech. What was your question? The death penalty and emotion?
Do you think that the death penalty is more emotional based, or more based on emotion than actual, logic?
No. As far as a judge is concerned, we're unlike the public who can react emotionally to that charge. But as a judge, you have to take into consideration only the evidence, the law, and make your decision based upon that small framework. You don't have the luxury of being emotional. That is something that is, we haven't really talked about that, but as a judge, you have to sever your emotions, not compassion, but your emotions, your hate, your caring, your love for this or that, and make it your decision based upon what's fair, what's reasonable, based upon the law and the evidence.
Since I've been involved with the death penalty for 20 years, I can tell you this, that and since I'll be retiring in a few months, I can tell you, no European country, no South American country, Canadian country, and most northern states have the death penalty. So I think in this state, it has been an issue where the legislature holds it near and dear. They think that it's a way to punish. The problem is that it takes so long to get those cases through that the victims rarely feel that they're getting ultimate justice. Right now, it's either if you're charged with first-degree murder and you're convicted, which is a jury does that, The jury decides guilt or innocence. You either get the death penalty or life in prison without the possibility of parole. And now, because of certain decisions of the U.S. Supreme Court and our court, a jury has to unanimously vote to impose the death penalty. It's not the judge. The judge looks at it after, but it's the jurors as triers of the fact. And we were talking about the right to vote. I can tell you this: if your parents, if you, as you get older, you have a duty as citizens to be jurors, because we're finding more and more jurors or people called don't show up. But it's a very controversial issue. I think it's unequally applied, more poor people. But we've got, it is what the law is in this state. So I don't know if that, I could go on for a long time, but I don't know if that answers your question. But it is an emotional issue among, I think, a lot of people.
We have a question right here. She's been waiting for a while.
Good morning. My name is Daisy Garcia. I go to Palm Beach Lakes High School, and I'm a sophomore. This is a general question. Has there ever been a case that has affected you personally and, changes the way you view cases now?
So I treat every case separate. Everything's different. I don't want to drag what I've learned in one case into the other. They're all separate and apart. There are things that I think about for a very long time. I'm a human being. But as far as how I approach each individual case, I do the prep work for that case. I listen to it, and it lives in its little box. And if I start bringing things in that don't belong, then I'm not doing anybody any good. But as far as if you're asking, are there cases that I think about? Yes.
We have a
question here.
Question back here.
Well, good morning, and my name is Yulian, and I'm from Lakewood, from Criminal Justice. And my question is, why did you give the 12-year-old girl sympathy and not the 15-year-old boy who was making prank phone calls?
Can we repeat that, please?
Okay, well, my question is, why did you give the 12-year-old girl sympathy and not the 15-year-old boy who was giving prank calls?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Well, I think I got it. Okay. First of all, I didn't give her sympathy. I did something that I do for all of my kids, and I responded to her letter. And I didn't know that little act would have such a great effect on her. I was not the judge in the 13-year-old boy's case, so I don't know what that judge was thinking, probably just going on the law. And I always went on the law, but I always put I have this inability to forget what I experienced when I was a teenager. And it kind of leaves you as a judge feeling, I know that if I do something kind to for someone, it's going to turn out a lot better than if I do something mean to somebody. So I don't know what the other judge was thinking, but that's my thought.
I'm Amy Rooney, and I'm an 8th grader at LC Swain, and I would like to ask, when dealing with tough cases, do you like to work collaboratively or independently to reach a verdict?
On the trial court, the judges work, and we're making a decision on our own. In the appellate courts, the 4th DCA and the Supreme Court, they work far more collaboratively. That doesn't mean that I may not contact Judge Delgado and just run things by him just to get a sense, but on the appellate side, they have to work collaboratively because they're writing opinions either as a 3-person panel or as a 5- or 7-person panel, depending on the case in the Supreme Court.
I've done both jobs as a trial court judge and an appellate court judge. And frankly, I enjoy more on the Court of Appeal the ability, as part of our regular practice, as Judge Rowe just said, to speak with other judges to get their perspective. Because as much as we'd like to believe that we are always following the law as strictly as we possibly can, we are still human beings, and we're governed by our own knowledge and intelligence and perspective. So it's good to hear what other smart people have to say and listen to what they have to say, because their perspective may be different, and you might learn something by listening to other people. Having done both, I think there's value in working with others to hear what they have to say before ultimately it's your decision and your decision alone, and you live with that decision. But having heard from other people is always very valuable. By the way, I teach at LC Swain, so let's hear for LC Swain.
And I thought that was, I loved your use of the word collaboratively, because in life, being collaborative and listening to the other person's view is really what it's about. In the Supreme Court, we've got to be collaborative because we have to convince at least 3 other people to our viewpoint. So it's a lesson in collaboration. So you always have to try to be nice to everybody, because you've got to be working with them. And it is, each level of court is different in how it functions.
My name's Jaheim Frierson. I'm a sophomore at Palm Beach Lakes High School. It's a question for Judge Delgado. Have you had a case that has touched your heart, like Judge Alvarez has had?
Yeah, very many. Children, they walk into the courtroom. They're required to be there, unless there's a really good reason why they shouldn't be. And they have a story. And some of the stories are absolutely wonderful, and some of them will break your heart. But you're there to listen to them so you can make the decision. And if you're a person, I don't know how you don't listen to those things and are moved in some way, shape, or form. I've got to make my decisions based on the facts and the law, but that doesn't mean that I don't listen to the kids as they tell me what they've experienced, what they've seen, how they're living. There are some things that I hear that, are sad, but there are some really incredible things that I hear. I've met Miss Doss. She's wonderful. She speaks to some of the kids in my courtroom. I've got children who have graduated high school, have enrolled at state college or university, and I have, as soon as the case is closed, I tell them that they're always welcome in the courtroom. And they will come back and they'll show me the report cards. And so I've seen children who have come from a very tough place walk in with the biggest smiles on their faces and show me some straight A's. And I've had kids who've come in from very tough places and they show me B's and C's, and I'm proud of all of them. But if you're listening to the children and they're telling you their stories and you're doing the best you can, they're going to come back and they're going to talk to you, and yes, it does move you.
Hello, my name is Elijah Cardi. I attend Palm Beach Lakes High School, and I'm in 11th grade. 11th grade, yeah. And my question is, how do you overturn a jury's decision?
Well, sitting on the Court of Appeal, what we will look at sometimes is, for example, was there sufficient evidence for the jury to make the decision they did? Again, jurors are human too, so they may listen to the evidence and think they're making a fair decision, but when you review the evidence after the case is over, there was no way that any reasonable juror could have made the decision they made. So maybe their decision was based on their passions, hate to say it, based on their prejudice, but that may happen too, and you have to be cognizant of that. That's very rare that we overturn a jury decision. Usually the reason that we're setting aside a decision for a new trial is not because anything the jurors did. It's because the trial judge made some decision along the way about what the jury was allowed to hear and sometimes what the jury was not allowed to hear. And that may have affected the jury's decision in the case. And so after we make the decision and say, well, the trial judge either should have let the jury hear this or should not have let the jury hear something else, if we think it's significant enough that it might have changed the outcome of the case, we send it back for a new trial. But we don't say back to the trial judge, we think this is the result, or what the jury should come back with on the next trial. We don't. Our job is to simply make sure that the trial judge followed the law so that the jury made their decision based on the proper set of evidence.
Hi, I'm Sophia Cozy. I'm a sophomore at the History and Law Academy in Spanish River. And my question is, you guys don't get to decide whether they're guilty or not, but regardless of the outcome, you have to decide a sentence. Do you ever think about the sentencing, how you just change someone's life, even if they didn't deserve it, in your personal opinion, because you had a sentence according to laws and like precedents?
The judges are bound by, like, for example, first-degree murder. I said the sentence can only be, if the jury doesn't find the death penalty, then it's a mandatory life without the possibility of parole. And judges many times are constrained by what is called sentencing guidelines. And I never sat as a trial judge in criminal. So let's hear from Judge Gerber on that.
Sentencing is probably the most difficult job a judge has in a criminal division, because all of what we've talked about today about the law on whether things should come into evidence or not, we can look up the decisions in books. But when it comes to sentencing, there is no book that tells us that we just have this large set of guidelines where we can sentence anyone from no jail to literally decades in jail. And so how do you as a judge do that? Well, when you have the experience of doing it for an extended period of time, you have to remember, well, last week I had a case like this, and now I've got a different person in front of me. I want to be fair to not just the person who's in front of me. I want to be fair to the person who was here last week, and I want to be fair to the person who's going to be coming in next week and the week after that, that I'm sentencing them all within the same range of time. As Justice Pariente alluded to earlier, there's now studies being done that, that we hate to hear, but are maybe in fact true, that just based on what has been referred to as implicit bias, that a person who comes in front of somebody today because of the color of their skin may get sentenced different than someone next week who has a different color of their skin. Again, that's something that we're very especially aware of, certainly more than ever now, that we have to be very appreciative of. And we not only have to be consistent among our own decisions, but we have 4 other judges sitting to my right who are making decisions in their cases every day too. And so we have to talk amongst ourselves too and say, hey, well, I have this type of case. What kind of sentence are you levying in this type of case? Because you don't want to have a situation where if you go in front of Judge Gerber, you're going to get this number of years, but if you go in front of that judge, you're going to get a lot more years. That's not fair either. So we have to be very cognizant of how we're each dealing with sentences so that, again, we're fair to everybody who's coming before us.
So it's probably one of the toughest things that I feel I've got to do, because I exclusively listen to cases about children, dependency or delinquency, and their family cases. I'm in what's called the Unified Family Court Division. And so whatever is associated with that child comes to me. And so by the time I'm asked to make this decision, I have had a great deal of experience with this particular family, this particular child. I've heard about what's going on in their family. I've heard about their cases. I've ordered sentencing investigations and reports and psychologist evaluations. I've had a hearing where everybody's telling me about the child, and it doesn't make it easier. It's still something that's very, it's not a pleasant thing to experience, but it's something that we have to do. So to answer your question, how it is that it's done, it's with a great deal of information, a great deal of care, and not something that is taken lightly.
I think you're really hit on something, and as future law enforcement, lawyers, judges, I would really have you take a look at the whole criminal sentencing and juvenile sentencing system. There are great disparities, not only within judges, but around the state. And what we now know is that what influences behavior, especially for juveniles, is something called adverse childhood experiences, being exposed to domestic violence, having a parent in prison, person being involved or having parents that have drug or alcohol, just like Judge Alvarez was discussing with Veronica. And every time a judge decides that instead of giving that especially a young defendant, when they don't give her or him juvenile sanctions and they consign them to the adult court with a prison sentence, they're essentially making a decision that this child is not going to be a productive member of our society. So it's I think it's a very big issue, and the legislature, because they looked at the disparity, actually now have required there's going to be a computer system where all the judges' sentences are going to go into a large matrix, and so everyone will have that available. One other thing, though, in many cases, most go by pleas, so you also have to look at the state attorneys and whether they're being unequal in their sentences. So a lot of times if there's a plea in adult court, the judge is just following what the two parties have agreed to, and that can also influence it.
Hello, my name is Savannah Garrett, and I go to Spanish River, and I'm a sophomore, and my question is for anybody, and it is, do you think that in the past year with the Road to Change movement started by the Parkland students, do you think it'll have an effect on the number of younger people that vote?
Well, I think we're the Malcolm Cunningham Bar people. What do you think? Because if it doesn't, then everything they're doing, it better.
Correct. I mean, you're exactly right. This movement has inspired so many young people to do more than they thought they were ever capable of doing before. And they're crisscrossing the country, registering young voters, having them understand and realize how powerful their voice is. So I think all of you should be inspired by what they're doing, no matter what side of the political aisle you fall on. We can all take away some really, really powerful and inspiring messages from what they're doing.
I'm going to say something tangentially related. So there was a question about 5 or 6 questions back that was asked about how we maintain impartiality. And one of the ways is that we just don't comment on the political branches. And that keeps us away from some of these issues. And so the questions will be asked and we'll look at each other. And that's, I think, one of the things that helps us stay out of one side or the other.
My name is Curtis Franklin. From Glade Central. I'm a senior. When you explore denunciation, there's a juvenile defendant that constantly keep coming to court. In such cases like Veronica, how would you deal with that juvenile defendant? Would you determine if they would go to a residential facility or a mental facility?
Okay, so I learned a lot when I was in the juvenile division. Probably I learned more from my kids than they learned from me. And one of the things that I learned is that sending a kid away to a juvenile delinquency residential program was more often less effective and beneficial to the child than keeping the child in the community, if I could get the services in the community, unless the child was a danger to themselves or others. That was a different thing. But my kids taught me a lot of things, not the least of which is, Judge, you can punish me, and I'll be back next week. But Judge, if you give me an education, you'll never see me again. So I tried to tie all of those things, and just like Judge Delgado and Judge Baker, we would try to make education the primary thing. And I would give a kid 120 hours of community service work, right, for a misdemeanor. And they go nuts. Wait, I can't do that. I said, wait, hold on. For every A that you get, I'll give you 7 hours of credit against that 120 hours. I got more kids on honor rolls by hanging that carrot out there than any punishment I could have given them. Does that answer your question? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's have a hand for all the judges.
And thank all of you for coming. It means a lot to us to be able to talk to you and for you to be able to talk to the bench. And thank you, each and every justice, for participating today. And mostly thank you to the School Board of Palm Beach County for putting this on, as I understand it, for 8 years now. And Bill Price for putting on an amazing program. Okay.
Thank you all for being here. If you guys will join your chaperones and report back to your buses at this time.